Hello everyone and welcome to Aero Innovations. I'm Aero, your AI host. If you're new to the channel, I break down every notable hand I play from the perspective of a professional who's been in the game over a decade and a half. July was one of the worst months I've had this year. I lost huge on 3 major sessions, breaking the 21 win streak I was on. In total, I lost just over $6,500 between the 3 sessions. I felt like Icarus flying too close to the sun. There's not a whole ton to discuss from those sessions though. I didn't take any huge bad beats. It's just a matter of getting no action whenever I had a huge hand, getting all of my big pocket pairs cracked, or simply missing every flop in $50 or $75 hands. Those hands add up over hours and hours of missing boards though. As you can see from my biggest losing session for the month, there were no huge spikes either up or down. It was just a steady decline. See? I am human. I suffer huge losses sometimes. I still profited by the end of the month though, averaging over $50 an hour after all is said and done. August is currently shaping up to be another amazing month, but let's first dive into a couple of exciting sessions from back in early July. For this first session, we're playing 2-5 no limit hold'em at the Wynn Encore in Las Vegas, where I buy in for $1,500, which is 300 big blinds. It's 12:12 in the morning on Thursday, July 18th. 24 minutes into the session, the middle position opens for 15. The low jack and button both call. Due to the number of callers, I decide to defend my big blind for 10 more with ace-7 offsuit. We go 4 ways to a flop of ace, king, 8, with 1 diamond and 2 clubs. I check to the original raiser, who c-bets for 20 into the $60 pot. The other 2 players fold. I recognize the bet is super weak for the wet board texture, but my hand is also pretty weak too, so I just call. The turn is an ace of spades, reducing the probability that my opponent is carrying an ace. The action gets checked around. The river brings in a 5 of hearts, which changes nothing. Rather than leading into my opponent, which will most likely get a fold, I decide to check the action once again, allowing my opponent to hang himself if he's so inclined. My opponent takes the bait and bets for 85 into the pot of $100, which is a considerable bet considering how weak the flop bet was. I think he's trying to get max value out of a hand like king-queen. Unfortunately, it's not going to work out the way he thinks it is. I, too, go for some thin value by putting in a small raise to 200. Let's see who takes who to Value Town. After about 40 seconds of thinking my offer over, my opponent decides to pass on my wonderful ticket price and puts in the fold. We're off to a good start, up $137 less than half an hour into the session. I win several small insignificant hands leading to this next hand. We're 6-handed when the cutoff opens to 15. I call on the button with king 10 offsuit. I don't even bother to limp with this hand, but it's okay to defend with on the button, especially in a shorter game. The big blind calls as well, so we go 3-handed to a flop of 10 high with 2 clubs. The big blind checks. The original raiser leads with a bet of 30. He's on the conservative side, so I'm not sure if I'm any good here. But I can't play this hand only to flop top pair and fold, so I make the call, and the big blind folds. The turn is an ace of hearts. The OG raiser leads with a bet of 50. I wasn't sure if I was good on the flop, but I'm definitely no good now. I take a little bit of time to think about it before making the fold. My opponent is generous enough to show a set of aces. We're still up $318, 1 hour into the session though. 25 minutes later, the under the gun opens to 25. The +1 calls. I call with pocket 3s in the cutoff, and the big blind calls. We go 4 ways to a flop of 4, 9, 8 with 2 diamonds. Everyone checks to me. Seeing as I'm an aggressive bastard, I put in a full pot bet of $100. Only a draw will call this type of bet, and I can assess how to handle a caller on future streets. The original raiser calls with a 2K stack while everyone else folds. The turn is a 7 of hearts. He suddenly leads with a bet of 200. I'm guessing he hit the 7 with 10 jack, which would be 2 overs and an open-ended straight draw on the flop. I have no choice but to fold. Half an hour later, under the gun and +1 both limp. The middle position opens for 30. He's a local pro and a pretty good player. I call on the button with a speculative 4-5 of diamonds. The blinds fold, but both limpers call. We go 4 ways to a flop of ace, 6, 2 with 2 spades and 1 diamond. We have a gut shot straight with a backdoor flush draw. The action gets checked to the original raiser, who puts in a tiny c-bet of 40 into the pot of 125. That's a great price for our hand in position, so I put in the call. And the other 2 players fold. The turn brings the 9 of diamonds. That's not the 3 we needed, but it does dramatically improve our outs. Suddenly, the original raiser throws out a completely massive overbet of 300, with a stack of over 4,000, easily covering me. This is 50% larger than the pot. I tank here for a long while. That's an extremely large bet. For such a large bet, if I were to raise here, my line would be ridiculously strong. If I were to raise, I would need to throw out at least $800. If I raise and he jams, however, I'd be pot committed to call, and that would really suck with only one card to come. If I didn't also have a straight draw with my backdoor flush draw, this would be the easiest fold in the world. If I hit the straight or the backdoor flush, I think I can get paid, as he'll think I'm more likely to have the front door flush draw. The way I see it, I have a gut shot straight draw and 2 different flush draws, because I'm totally going to represent the spades if it hits. That's 12 real outs and 8 fake outs against a naked ace, which is more than enough to warrant a call and take the path of lesser variance. So I make the call. Unfortunately, the river is a king of clubs. My opponent checks. I wasn't born yesterday. This is pro-on-pro action. Every draw missed. I can represent the spades, but not a random king. Yes, I do have 5 high, but this is a trap. I check the action back. My opponent tables ace-queen for the win. We're now down $132 for the first time this session, and top back up with another $100 to our stack. 5 hands later, I limp under the gun with pocket 4s. My pair is too small to open raise, and too good to simply fold. This is live poker after all, not some online GTO nonsense. It's perfectly fine to limp with your small pairs in lower stakes live games. The low jack and high jack also limp. The small blind suddenly raises to 40, which is actually an incredibly good bet sizing due to the number of limpers and his weak position. The big blind folds, but all 3 limpers call. We go 4 ways to a flop of ace, jack, 4, rainbow. Doot. We flop bottom set. Now pay very close attention to how I play this hand. The original raiser checks. Do not ever make the mistake of trying to trap with bottom set. You don't want to give a free draw to some middling pair to hit a higher set on you, which will absolutely wreck your stack, your night, and possibly your week. I lead for a tiny bet of 60, hoping to keep any near dead draws in, such as the naked ace or jack. Meanwhile, I'm cautious of any Broadway cards potentially hitting the turn, because a bet this small will also invite gut shots to try to outdraw you. The low jack folds, but the high jack and original raiser both call. The turn is an 8 of spades, putting 2 spades on board. The original raiser checks. I know that the hijack is aggressive, so I lay the bear trap, and also check as well. With how the hand is played out, the small blind and I have both shown massive weakness. The hijack takes the bait, and throws out an utterly massive bet of 300 into the pot of 345. He's trying to take the pot down right here and now with a bet that size. The original raiser tanks. If he shoves here, I'm going to feel sick. That can only be a higher set, like jacks or aces. He has a stack of about 1100. I'm only invested $100, so I think I'd actually have to fold. But fortunately, after a full 45 seconds, he just flat calls. This is the best possible outcome. I have both opponents exactly where I want them, both potentially drawing dead if they only have a single pair. The pot is too massive to screw around though, so I put in the check raise jam for $13.59. The hijack tanks for over a minute. He eventually calls, and the small blind quickly gets out of the way. I announce that I have a set. The hijack says he's on a spade draw, and also has a pair of 4s. The river is clean. It's a 5 of hearts, so I win an absolutely massive pot of $33.63, putting me up $1,719 2 hours and 15 minutes into the session. If I had played that hand any differently, such as checking the flop or betting too big, the action would have either been checked back or the hijack would have folded, causing this pot to be much, much smaller. If I had simply laid out on the turn, the pot would also have been much, much smaller. But since I knew the hijack was aggressive, I set the trap that allowed us to play for stacks, meanwhile also trapping the original raiser in for an additional $300 on the turn. Always anticipate how your opponents will behave when you're analyzing how to play a hand. 35 minutes later, we approach our next hand. Everyone folds to the button, who opens for 15. The small blind calls. I have ace-jack offsuit in the big blind. This is a much better than average hand for the big blind. The vast majority of button opens against the blinds will be pretty speculative, so I put in a large 3-bet to 65. Both players call. Whoops, that didn't go as planned. It's okay though, I still have a pretty decent hand. The flop comes queen, 4-6 with 2 clubs. The small blind checks to me. I have absolute squadoosh. There's only one high card out there though, and it's a pretty good one for my 3-bet range. So I start with a 40% pot bet of 80. The button thinks about it for a full 50 seconds before calling. He's the same opponent who had his $300 trapped in the last notable hand we played, which means he likes to call light, which is especially transparent with how long it took him to make the flop call. That's fine. We can force some aggression on him on a further street. That plan flies right out the window when the small blind suddenly puts in the check raise to 280. Call 15, then 65 pre-flop, then check raises flop. Can anyone guess what he had? It should be pretty straightforward. Please take a moment to type in your guess in the comments below. Just pause the video and take a guess. It'll give you good practice towards putting your opponents on a range of hands. Whenever you watch a vlog, you shouldn't just watch for entertainment. You should always be guessing what the players have to sharpen your skills. In any case, I fold, and the button quickly folds as well, but not before asking the small blind which set he had, the 6s or the 4s. He's nice enough to answer that he had a set of 4s. His hand was so blatantly face up that we both knew what he had. Now compare that to how I played my set of 4s the very last hand. Being a profitable poker player isn't about catching hands. It isn't about getting lucky. That makes no logical sense. We all get the same hands, just at different times. No one is logically luckier than any other player over time. That's called the law of large numbers. Being profitable is about how to maximize your winning hands and how to minimize your losing hands, squeezing out every tiny bit of value when you have an opponent notched, even if there are scare cards on the board. 20 minutes after this hand, my table breaks, so I head home, up $1,432 after 3 hours and 24 minutes. This leads to our next interesting session, which takes place on Tuesday, July 23rd. Again, we're playing 2-5 No Limit Hold'em at the Wynn Encore in Las Vegas, where we buy in for $1,500, which is 300 big blinds. 14 minutes into the session, we're 6-handed when the under the gun limps. I open to 20 in middle position. The big blind and under the gun both call, so we go 3-handed in position to a flop of Jack, 6, 3 with 2 spades and 1 heart. When the action gets checked to me, I take advantage of having position by putting in a tiny c-bet to 25, even though the flop missed me completely. I do have 2 overs and a couple of backdoor draws though. The big blind calls, but the under the gun folds. The turn brings the 5 of hearts, putting 2 hearts to go along with the 2 spades. This time, when the big blind checks to me, I give up and check the action back. The river brings a 10 of hearts, putting the 3rd heart on board. The big blind decides to lead this time, leading with an abysmally small bet of 25 into the pot of 110. This smells like
a den of stinking evil. Cover your nose, boo.
With this bet of $25, the pot would be $135, which is worth my time to attempt some highway robbery. I ask him how much he has behind and notice he has about 350. See? This is the power of position. I couldn't have done this if I were first to act. I put in a sinister raise to 130 with nothing but king high. My opponent quickly folds, so I pocket the cool Ben Franklin. For this next hand, I open to 25 in the +1 with pocket jacks. The small blind 3-bets me to 95 with a full $1,500 stack. He just lost $1,000 after flopping the second nut straight versus the nut straight just a few hands ago, so I'm not sure if he's tilted or not. The big blind cold calls with a stack of about 450, which is never a good move. You should never call for almost a quarter of your stack pre-flop. I have almost no idea what sort of hand would do that. We're too deep for me to 4-bet, and I've only been on the table barely 20 minutes, so I don't have a full grasp of how this guy plays yet. I just make the call. The flop comes 2, 3, 4, rainbow. The OG raiser leads with a c-bet of 165. He's firing into 2 players, with one of them being short stacked, so I don't think this is a bluff. The big blind folds, but it's too soon for me to let go of my hand just yet. I make the call. The turn is an 8 of diamonds, putting 2 diamonds on board. My opponent leads with a bet of 375. He would have to be incredibly brazen to be doing this with 9s or 10s, which is about the only hands I currently beat. Sure, he could always be bluffing, but if I call here, I'll be forced to call a potential river shove. I can find a better spot. I make the fold, and top up another $100. Here, the low jack opens to 15. I 3-bet to 50 in the cutoff with ace-queen offsuit. The small blind cold calls, but the low jack folds. We go heads up in position to a flop of 9, 5, 9 with 2 spades. He checks. Paired boards are a good board to continue c-betting on because it's rare that your opponent will hit anything. So I continue with a strong bet of 75 into the pot of 120. But my opponent calls, so I guess he must have a middling pair of some sort. So here I am, all alone in this dark, desolate street, not a single pair to my name, when lo and behold, around the corner comes this lovely streetwalker on the turn. It's the Queen of Hearts. My opponent checks it over to me. Okay, so I tried to strong-arm him with a large bet on the flop, but that didn't work. Now I have an actual hand. But since I'm putting him on a middling pocket pair with only 2 outs, let's string him along for some value without scaring him away. I put in a bet of 100, which is much smaller compared to the pot than my flop bet. Yes, there is a flush draw out there, so if he's on it, I'd be giving him an insanely good price. But this wasn't a limped or even single raised pot. I mean, anything is possible, but it's very unlikely for your opponent to wake up with a random flush draw in a heads-up situation after he cold calls a 3-bet pre-flop. My opponent thinks about my bet for about 10 seconds, but again, he calls. The river brings a random 4 of clubs, changing nothing. I'd be more concerned about an 8 or a 10 because those are the types of pairs I'm putting him on. So when he checks the action over to me, I try to bleed him for another 200, which is about 40% of the pot. He tanks for over 30 seconds before finally making the fold. So here, the middle position limps. I have a couple of dirty skanks in the hijack. I open to 35. He may think that's a really large open, but watch what happens. The button, big blind, and middle position all call. You need to learn how to assess your table, raising larger on a table that has a much higher likelihood of calling pre-flop raises. The flop comes ace, 8, 9, with 2 spades. The big blind and middle position both check to me. Yeah, right, I'm not touching this board with a 10-foot pole. I check the action back, and so does the button. The turn brings a 5 of clubs. The big blind now leads for a very small bet of 45. The middle position calls. I'm getting a very good price. If you watch the vlog regularly, you might recall a hand from vlog number 5 where I call for $80 with pocket 4s on a board with 2 spades and 2 aces. Here, it's only 45 to call, and I do have the queen of spades. However, here, I'm going to fold. This is a completely different situation. I could be drawing dead if someone is trapping with 6-7. Someone might be drawing with 10-jack, causing a queen on the river to be as dirty as a slovenly wench. In the unlikely event that I do spike a queen and it's good, it's extremely unlikely for me to be able to extract over $900 from this pot, which is what I would need to mathematically to be able to make this call. So I make the fold, but the button calls. The river brings the 6 of hearts, allowing a naked 7 to make a straight. The action gets checked around. The big blind shows ace-10 offsuit for top pair. The middle position shows 6-7 offsuit for the turned nut straight, and it's good to win the pot. See what I mean? People on this table are calling with complete garbage, which is why I opened the action to 35 pre-flop. His unorthodox style tried to trap on the turn on a completely wet board, which is not only a bad move, but also the reason why I didn't call for only $45. It's one of the hands I was afraid of. The very next hand after the queens, under the gun opens to 15. The middle position calls. I'm holding pocket 10s in the low jack and 3-bet to 75. The button cold calls with a stack of about 475, and everyone else folds. He's a tight Asian guy and also regular here at the win. The flop is jack, jack, 2, rainbow. I start with a check. My opponent bets $50. Okay, so for his stack size, the best possible hand he could have called my 3-bet for pre-flop is pocket jacks. Anything higher and he would have already shipped it. A naked jack is out of the question. There are 0 jacks in his range for his playstyle and my 3-bet price. Do you think quad jacks is going to bet this flop? Because I certainly don't. So we're either chopping or he has a hand like 8s or 9s. And if he has 8s or 9s and I call here, do you think he'll continue to blast off his stack without hitting an 8 or a 9? Because I certainly don't. So our only option is to raise and deny equity, not giving him a free card to trump our hand. I put in the check raise to 150. He huffs and haws for an entire minute before making the fold. Here, the cutoff opens for 20 with a stack of about $2,000. He's our opponent from earlier in the night that I had to fold pocket jacks to on the 2-3-4 flop. I'm itching to get revenge, so when the button calls, I 3-bet to 115 in the big blind with ace-king offsuit. The original raiser calls, but the button folds. The flop comes ace, jack, 8, rainbow. This is a much better than average flop. I'm only realistically losing to pocket 8s, and maybe pocket jacks once in a blue moon. Not many people call with ace-jack for 115 pre-flop, but you can't remove that from the equation completely either. I down bet to 75, and my opponent calls. The turn is a 6 of diamonds, putting 2 diamonds on board, but I'm not too concerned about that. I put in a deceptive check while simultaneously controlling the pot size, acting as if I perhaps 3-bet with kings or queens. My opponent takes the bait and throws out $175. I take a moment to think. I can't really check raise here with only one pair, because the only hands that will likely call me are the ones that I mentioned earlier that have me beat. So after a short while, I make the call. The river brings in a board pairing 8 of spades. I'm a huge fan of that card. It greatly reduces the likelihood that my opponent is holding pocket 8s. I check again, fully intending to call just about any size bet here. Unfortunately, my opponent gives up, stating that he has king high. At least I more than made up for my fold with pocket jacks earlier, and in a position that I'm much more comfortable in. This is why I decide to fold in the spots that I do. It's much more important to protect your stack than be placed in an uncomfortable position where you're not sure if you're good or not. So long as your stack is protected, you can always find a different spot later, whether it's against a different opponent or on another day completely. The next hour and a half passes by without any notable hands to discuss before we play this next hand. Here, the +1 limps. I open to 20 in the low jack with 9-10 of hearts. The high jack 3-bets me to 65 with the full stack of 1500. He's another tight Asian pro, not quite as tight as Gao, but still a part of his usual posse. For this price, and with our stack sizes, I make the call, even though I'm out of position. The flop comes ace, 6, 10, rainbow with 1 heart. I flop middle pair with a couple of backdoor draws. I start with a check. My opponent downbets to 35 into the pot of 140, which shows either incredible strength or incredible weakness. I make the call. The turn is a 5 of clubs. This doesn't help us whatsoever. None of the backdoor potential draws even come in. We're sitting here with literally middle pair. So I check again. My opponent suddenly ramps up the ante to a dramatic bet of 135, which is 60% of the pot compared to his flop bet of only 25%. I pull out my Asian Thieves dagger and decide it's time to get to work. I don't call it that because it's used to rob Asians, although in this case I suppose it's definitely useful for that purpose. He's pretty capped here with the most likely hand being a single pair holding like ace-king or ace-queen. It's possible he has a set of aces, but it's unlikely he has a set of 10s since he's on the tighter side. I, on the other hand, can represent all sorts of nonsense from 5-6 suited for 2 pairs, a set of 6s, or 10s, or even ace-10 suited for top 2 pairs. I don't actually have any of that, but that part's irrelevant. I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I put in a check raise to 430, because, this is how we deal with tighties. And if you know, then you know! My opponent quickly makes the laydown in less than 2 seconds, so we take down a decent-sized pot. With how fast he folded, I don't think he even had an ace. This was just pro-on-pro, Asian-on-Asian violence. Why, my brother? Why did it have to come down to this? Why am I here, standing over your dead money? I decide to cash out after this hand as it is fast approaching my 4-hour deadline. In for 1600 and out for 2176 for a total profit of $576 after 3 hours and 51 minutes of playtime. Oh, by the way, I've decided to open the doors for coaching sessions after all, since I've gotten quite a few requests. I'll be hosting one-on-one sessions via video call or group sessions for a fraction of the amount if I can get enough people interested. If you're local here in Vegas, then we can meet up in person. Feel free to contact me via email or Instagram for serious inquiries. I'll also be continuing the coaching series on Patreon, which should be active this coming week. I noticed that at least half of you who are watching this vlog aren't subscribed. My wife and I have been putting in a ton of work for each and every single video we produce, so please help out by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. It helps more than you know. And comment below if you liked anything you see in any one of my videos, or to point out anything you would like to see different in the future. Oh, and as a side note, we just celebrated our 10th anniversary this last Friday on August 16th. So here's a toast to the beautiful woman who makes all of these videos possible, and to the wonderful mother to our 2 amazing children. As always, I hope to see you in the next video.